We are joined now by Spencer Holbrook of Lettermen Row. And no, we did not forget about Ohio State just because the team on the other side of the rivalry is making all the news this week. The Buckeyes have a game. Like Spencer, a couple of years ago, can you imagine Ohio State, Wisconsin being this overshadowed by anything?
No, and that's the craziest thing is like these two teams have played in Big Ten championship games. There's been their share of upsets in Madison. There's been the one score games. I think the 2016 Ohio State team that went to the playoff played an overtime game in Madison, and yet here we are because Jim Harbaugh, I guess, has to have the spotlight at all times apparently because if these two teams just aren't getting any love this week, this is a top three team on the road, and we're just not really talking about it.
Well, and I think a lot of that is Wisconsin playing with a backup quarterback and things not going as well for them this season as they had hoped. But I am curious with Ohio State, coming off such a huge win against Penn State, is there any concern that, hey, that's a lot of eggs to put in that basket? Can they be ready again to go on the road and play?
Oh, sure. And that's the thing. I asked Ryan Day about it specifically on Wednesday night at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. He does like a 10-minute lightning round on Wednesday nights where a couple people get to pepper him with some questions, final updates. And I said, Ryan, how do you know that a team is ready after an emotional win? How do you know that a team is okay with going on the road and competing in a game? Because this is a program that's had its struggles on the road in the Big Ten West after big games. It's a very niche market, but it's one that Ohio State had cornered there for 2 years under Urban Meyer. So he said you could see the look in their eye. You can see the way their energy at practice is. He said they've had a great week of practice. That he doesn't feel that the letdown is coming. Some weeks he could feel that. Even after Notre Dame, they had the off week, but you could still sense it a little bit during that week of the Maryland game. They were still kind of resting on that Notre Dame game a little bit. They know that the calendar is about to turn in November, and you cannot do anything as far as get complacent. You have to be full go at all times because not only is this trip to Wisconsin coming up very quickly, and it's going to be here on Saturday. But after Wisconsin, you're 4 weeks from Ann Arbor, and that's we know what they're building toward. It's not winning at Wisconsin; they're building toward winning at Michigan and building with each win along the way.
So speaking of full go, Ryan Day said on his radio show that TreyVeyon Henderson is full go. How big of a difference does that make for the running game having him back?
Yeah, there were a couple runs against Penn State where you could see, 32 probably hits that hole, 32 probably makes that play, and that's not a slight to Chip Trainum or to Mayan Williams or even to Dallin Hayden, who ran pretty well, 76 yards and a touchdown on just 11 carries in that win over Purdue a couple weeks ago. But TreyVeyon Henderson was a 5-star prospect, and he's a 5-star player for a reason. He broke a freshman rushing record again in his freshman year for a reason. So he's a special type of player. He's a special type of back when he's healthy. And I think he's going to make a huge difference for this running game. It's going to be a game that's won, up front. Some of these Ohio State games, you can't really fall back on the old cliche because you kind of say press the Marv button and go from there. But in this game specifically, I think you've got to be able to run the ball a little bit with TreyVeyon, control the clock a little bit, or else Wisconsin's going to do that to you and keep your defense out on the field for 45 minutes of game clock. So I think TreyVeyon's going to make a huge difference in this game, and all accounts say that he's going to play. Now we've heard that the last couple of weeks. Ryan Day said, "Yeah, he's good. He's had a great week of practice. He's good. He's good." Well, this week Ryan Day was pretty definitive in saying he's full go. He's had a good week of practice. So I think we're going to see 32 back on the field.
Well, and it says something that they could go beat Penn State without him. But what did they feel like coming out of that game has to get better between now and when they play Michigan?
Yeah, I think it's Kyle McCord just being more consistent. He started 5 of 5, then went one of his next 7, and then finished 60% passing. That's pretty good. 63% passing against Penn State. You're going to take that. 22 of 35, 286, and a touchdown. You're going to take that, and you'll probably take it against Michigan with knowing that your defense is pretty good and knowing that maybe your signs are different against Michigan. So you're going to have a good feeling going into that game if Kyle McCord can be over 60%. But it's that consistency. He knows he needs to be better. He said he's his own biggest critic. I've got that story out, lettermenrow.com right now. He knows the consistency needs to be there more. But if you're saying at the end of the day you're 60%, that's great. But you can't be 54% in the first half and 78% in the second. You've got to be consistent. And that's where it comes in. The offensive line gave him time by and large against Penn State. They actually played their best game on the offensive line. They look like they're starting to come together. They gave him time to get the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. He's just got to do it a little bit more consistently for them to feel like, hey, we know that we can go in Ann Arbor and get a win.
I'm glad you brought up the line because it did seem like that was the best they played all season. That was everybody's big concern is how much will Kyle McCord be in distress in the pocket? And it certainly seemed like he wasn't. Um, does that feel like it's repeatable? Does that feel like that was a one-off, or what do you think has happened there?
Yeah, they've taken small steps in the right direction, but it seemed like one step forward, one step back at all times with this line. The penalties go away, but it was inconsistent up front. And then you were good up front, except the penalties were there, and that knocked you out of a couple of drives. It seemed like they started to put some things together. They've really, really simplified the running game with Justin Fry. Kind of pared everything down and given these guys a chance to not think so much, but just go and play. It's looked like it's working so far. And I asked Josh Fryer, the starting left tackle or right tackle, on Wednesday night, did it feel like you guys had more than 79 rushing yards? And he said, absolutely. We felt like we were coming off the ball better. We felt like we were more aggressive. We felt like we were playing with more confidence. That's a big deal for this line. It wasn't playing with a lot of confidence, the first few weeks of the season. Notre Dame was a good step for them, but I think Penn State could prove to be a turning point for this line. I don't want to say that definitively just because you're never really sure when you have a line that struggles from time to time. And Wisconsin presents some unique challenges just in the way they play defense. But I thought this line took a really good step forward, and you could see them start to hit a stride potentially after Wisconsin and Rutgers, two of the better fronts they're going to see on the way to the Michigan game. I think that things are looking up for that line.
So we talked after this happened, but I'm curious now that several weeks have gone by, kind of what the cumulative effect of this was. We talked about Ryan Day going after Lou Holtz, which it didn't matter who it was. It was somebody calling Ohio State soft and Ryan Day coming back very hard. How much did that kind of galvanize this team? And how much did it help, him kind of gain their trust and belief?
Yeah, I think it had a pretty good effect on this team. It made them believe, even more in Ryan Day. Yeah, every team is going to say they believe in their head coach, unless you see a team, that's completely on quit watch when it comes to their head coach. Like every team says they believe in the head coach. When he goes out and does something like that, I think you really have to latch on to those kind of things. You have to really, see that's the guy that you want leading the charge for you. And it's galvanized, I think, the leadership in this group with Tommy Eichenberg at linebacker and Cade Stover at tight end and Kyle McCord growing into leadership role. And Ryan Day kind of took that on a little bit, I think, in that night. Just like, hey, we've got some good leaders on this team, but I'll be the guy to lead us into war every time. And I think that there's something to be said about that. And now, there's a lot out there about Ryan Day still. There's a lot out there about Ohio State still, especially with this week with the story that's come out. But the Buckeyes have remained focused. I think that's a big deal. After this Penn State game, they feel like they were more physical than Penn State, which is a huge deal considering what we think of Penn State.
Right.
And so you think you're more physical than Penn State. You think your leadership is starting to come around. And it's all on the back of that Notre Dame win, which obviously we're all going to remember for how Ryan Day reacted, which I think has kind of rejuvenated this entire team, and they kind of ran with that Ohio against the world mentality that he brought up there that night.
I feel like another takeaway from that Penn State game is how important Cade Stover is to this offense and the passing game specifically, because even without Emeka Buka, it felt like he gave them another dynamic target that, maybe in past years, Ohio State didn't have at tight end.
Yeah, it's interesting because my good friend and Lettermen Row staff writer Tim May always says the tight end is always open. Ohio State's never utilized it correctly, I guess, because we've seen really good tight ends. Jeremy Ruckert a few years ago was the number one tight end in the country coming out of high school and just had like a career at Ohio State. He was there for 4 years and he did some nice things, but he never had like more than 30 catches. He never had more than 500 receiving yards. And now all of a sudden you've got Cade Stover on the Bolitnikoff Award watch list, which is just mind-blowing for an Ohio State tight end. It's really fun to see Cade do all of this because last year he was known as kind of a road grader and like not really much else. But as the season went on, you saw his hands get a little softer. You saw him become a little bit better of a pass catcher. And Keenan Bailey, the tight ends coach, deserves a lot of credit for that because he's worked with him, as a receiver from when Keenan was a wide receivers assistant with Brian Hartline. He's kind of infused that into him. But now you see this evolution of a guy who can throw a block. He's not the greatest blocker in the world. He will even admit that. He needs to get better there. He'll throw a block for you. I think he's not afraid to fight people, just because that's who he is as a farmer. You
I
got to
mean,
know him a
guy
little bit
played guy
a
played
week or two
linebacker,
ago.
defensive end too. Like the
Yeah,
physicality part you never worry about with him. It's just for me, it was can he develop into somebody who's a threat, a real threat in the pass game? And it seems like he absolutely had. I mean, there was a third down conversion in that game where he made a catch. I don't think many tight ends in the country could have made.
yeah, the mossing in the middle of the field. Like if you do that on the sideline, that's one thing. You make a nice catch on the sideline as a tight end. Okay, that's fine. You make a catch like that in the middle of the field, knowing some contact's coming your way, knowing you've got to go over a guy who is in all likelihood much more athletic than you. That's probably the most impressive thing I've seen Cade do, because even a guy who's around him a lot, I didn't know he had that in him. And when you see that, you're like, oh, okay, this is a guy who can really really help them. And if Kyle's ball might not be in the best placement, he can still go get it. That touchdown catch against Purdue where he reached back for it. Now Ryan Day's operating in a capacity where everyone's got a cue on Marvin. Everyone's got a cue on Emeka Egbuka when he comes back. And now you have the ability to sneak Cade Stover up the seam like he did against Indiana in game one, or leak out on the other side of the rollout like he did against Purdue a couple weeks ago. You're starting to see Ryan Day realize in real time that he has a tight end he can rely on deep in the passing game. And it is bringing in like a new layer, a new infusion to this offense that we haven't seen. Even when Kevin Wilson was there,
Yeah.
who's like a tight end guru, we didn't really see that. And so we're seeing that now, and it's really cool to see, especially with Cade being the beneficiary of it because he's just so fun to talk
Oh
to.
yeah. Yeah, we had him on the show last week. I mean, that dude, that's the guy you want on your team, like as a teammate, because he's given everything he's got at any given moment, and shoot, knows how to work hard when all you do is work on the farm when you're in your spare time. You mentioned Emeka Egbuka. He's been out. Ryan Day has said he thinks that he should be back for Wisconsin. How much do they, kind of bring him back slowly to make sure he's fully ready to go by the end of the season?
Yeah, it's something that they're going to have to be careful with, Andy, because we saw him on the field pregame in the Penn State game. He really tried. He wanted to be. He lived in the training room last week trying to get back to that Penn State game, and he warmed up with the team, and then he gave Brian Hartline a big hug, and they had a nice conversation on the field before they went in for the final dress, and then come out for the game. And when I saw that conversation, I was like, yeah, I think Brian Hartline's talking to him potentially about not playing in this game, just we need you for the stretch run. And I think that's the biggest message here is they need him for that stretch run. Marvin Harrison Jr. is amazing. He really is. He can get the ball no matter how many times it's going to him, he can get it. However, having Emeka Egbuka in there adds just another guy that you probably have to bracket. You probably have to double team because if you don't, he will make a one-on-one, his matchup. And
Yeah.
I think that's so important for this offense. We've seen special receivers time and time again in this offense. Paris Campbell had Chris Olave in that 2018 game. It ended up freeing up the 2018 Michigan game. Ends up freeing up Olave for 2 touchdowns, then Campbell for 2 touchdowns. We saw it in 19 and 20 with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. How the two of them being on the field was simply better because it's harder to defend two with 2 guys than it is one with 2 guys. It just makes such a difference. And time again, we've seen pairs of Ohio State receivers. Well, Marvin Harrison Jr. is good enough to be on his own, but he's even better when he's got Emeka Egbuka out there occupying some of that mental capacity for these defensive coordinators as well. He makes a huge difference, and
Yeah.
I think they're much better served having him for the Michigan game than they are having him for Wisconsin and Rutgers. So I'm anxious to see how they bring him back. I'm not sure if it'll be in full capacity this week.
Where does Carnell Tate fit into that? Is he sort of the Marvin of 2021? Is that where he is right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you told me that this team somehow didn't make the college football playoff, and we could talk about that in a different conversation, I guess. And Marvin Harrison Jr. was like, you know what, I'm okay not playing the Cotton Bowl. I'm going to go study for the NFL draft. I could see Carnell Tate having 3 touchdowns in a bowl game, just like Marvin Harrison Jr. did, because he's that kind of talent. Marvin actually said that freshman year Carnell Tate this year is in a better place than 2022 Marvin Harrison Jr. was when Marvin
Whoa.
Harrison Jr. became the best receiver in the country. And maybe that's Marvin like hyping up his guy who he
Yeah.
really trains with and likes. But Marvin Harrison Jr. knows his microphone. He knows that people don't take what he says lightly. And when he said that, everybody's jaw dropped because it was just one of those things where like, are you serious? Like, are you meaning that he's better as a freshman than you were? He says, no, he's better as a freshman than I was as a sophomore. So they know the talent they have with Carnell Tate. They know the talent that is in the room, waiting in the wings to be next up. And he was targeted the second most receive the guy with the second most targets at receiver last week in a top 10 matchup was Carnell Tate. Like they're getting him more involved. He's becoming more of a weapon for them. And I wouldn't be surprised if you don't even have to have an opt out in a bowl game to see Carnell Tate this year. You could see him have that 2018 Chris Olave game like he had against Michigan. You could see that from Carnell Tate in any of these next 5 games, and I would not be surprised at all. He's that kind of talent, and Kyle McCord obviously is willing to look for him in big time moments.
It's going to be fun the rest of the way to figure out how they spread it around as Ibuka comes back and Tate develops, and a lot to figure out as Ohio State hurdles toward a big one in Ann Arbor less than a month from now. Spencer, thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.